full disclosure, as the director of this department at Loyola, I've been doing this work now for a year and a half. And this work as it pertains to undocumented students specifically. My office, we are a team of 4 full-time staff members. We do a lot of heavy work around mentorship programs, looking at academic interventions and how we retain students of color, first-generation college students here at Loyola, and how we set them up for success during their time here. But really, I think one of the challenges that I found is that within Loyola Chicago network, that it really does require a lot more time and energy and resources. And so while the Ally training lives or is housed within our department, SDMA, as we refer Student Diversity and Multicultural Affairs here, it really has taken a village. And there's a committee, university-wide committee at Loyola Chicago that has really been lending their expertise. And this includes folks from admissions to enrollment management, financial aid, to the academic deans, and also specific faculty who are doing research around understanding the experiences of our undocumented populations and migrants and refugees as well.
Yeah, and so much like Chris was saying, I am a junior here. I've been working in SDMA I've been involved in SDMA ever since I got here 3 years ago, but really my undocumented student initiatives really started last year with the my involvement with the Share the Dream Ally Trainings, and then shout out to Flavio Bravo for his help in the Module Scholarship Initiative and Fund here at Loyola. So with the promotion of that, and really just my involvement with undocumented student initiatives ever since high school, because I am an undocumented student, and really the time that we really do find out we're undocumented, most folks, is during high school when applying to colleges and universities. And so just really jumpstarting my my pathway into the initiative in high school with starting co-funding a scholarship for undocumented folks at my high school. And so ever since then, I've been involved with the initiative, and I can't wait to grow a little bit more. And thanks also to Joe for having me here with the Share the Dream Ally Training.
So our Ally training is 3 hours long and has been since it was developed in 2012. But we thought what might be most useful is to understand kind of what's the context, what's the landscape here at Loyola Chicago specifically, and then also understand or get a chance to share with you some of the content slides. So we do have actual slides that we borrowed directly from the training, but please note that after this video presentation, we definitely want to be able to share with you the PDF document so that you can take a look at it in more depth. Again, it does span 3 hours. It's a lot of time. Some schools have similar Ally training where it takes anywhere from 4 hours to 6 hours. So again, I think it just depends on what's reasonable for your institution. All right, so we're going to be running through who we are. We did that. We wanted to show you also the way that we, as a department, as an institution, how do we brand this Ally training? How do we make people aware, be it staff, be it faculty and students, undergrads and graduate professional students? How do they recognize that we are a welcoming environment that is attuned to the needs of our undocumented populations? And so what you see on the screen right now is something that was created. This is the design for our Share the Dream Ally training. There are 3 aspects to this training, right? From left to right, you'll see the words awareness, advocacy, and alliance. And really what these are the 3, I would say, hallmarks of the training. It's our intent to really educate the masses, especially here at Loyola, as far as what are the issues, who are our students, what do we mean when we say undocumented, or I would say documented, and we'll explain some of this in a moment. We also want to generate a community, or continue, I should say, generating this community of advocates. Much like all of our Jesuit sister institutions, at the core of who we are as a school is a community who are working for folks on the margins, right? We are educators who are working for and with our populations who are marginalized or may often face discrimination of some sort. So we definitely want to emphasize the advocacy piece. And then finally, the alliance. I think it's important that we always, I would say, underscore the need to really build those bridges and showcase the strength that we have in numbers and the power of education. So that's what the decal that we provide to everyone who completes the training, what it looks like. All right. And so in the next slide, giving you some context of where we've been with this training, we in Student Diversity Multicultural Affairs, we also have a safe space training. It's been operated here through the department. This is again open to staff, students, and faculty who wish to learn more about the concerns around what does it mean to be part of the LGBTQIA community, and how do we continue to foster welcoming, safe space, how do we incorporate inclusive language in our daily interactions. So that safe space training was really the sort of the template that we use in constructing what we call the Share the Dream Undocumented Student Ally Training. And both Ally trainings are offered 3 hours long, and we tend to, as a department, strive to offer them at least 3 to 4 times per semester. Again, they're open to anyone who wishes to come. We've also been flexible with people who are not Loyola affiliated, but really are interested in understanding what the issues are and how to be supportive. So we invite them as well. We usually set a maximum cap on how many people can participate, just because we want to, because there's some interactive components, we don't want it to be too large. And so we usually cap it at around 30 to 35 participants. And I think we've been averaging anywhere from 20 to about 30 in the last couple of years. And then these are co-facilitated. The training has been co-facilitated at least by one staff member, tends to be the director of this department, and then a student intern. So we, in the past, before MIDA came on board, we actually had this training facilitated by graduate students who were interning in our office. And then for those of you interested in how many participants we actually have trained here, we estimate really close to 500. And we expect that by this semester in spring, we're going to surpass the 500 mark. You know, unfortunately, not all of those colleagues are still here, but you know, that information stays with them wherever they go. So we're pretty happy that we're able to reach such a large audience.
And also just like part of our audience members, we try to include people from different departments. We've had people from human resources, from libraries, who have provided their expertise in areas of financial aid, of working on campus internships. In terms of libraries, they've offered to open up their resources to have more books, more research on undocumented students. So really, like, these partnerships are really big, even just on our campus, because it just shows how like our trainings are expanding and how people are eager to even learn more and support the cause and to provide even more awareness for others.
Before we move to the next, sorry, Chris, the timeline, it's important to kind of know too the scope of how and the outreach that we undergo each year to reach training participants. Because my department is housed within the Division of Student Development, I mean, we really often will start there in our home base, and then we'll reach out to campus partners, as Maida mentioned, in student academic services. So we'll talk to our advisors at the beginning of each year to remind them that there are these ally trainings available, both the Share the Dream and our Safe Space training. We work very closely with HR, Human Resources, to also put a word out every summer term and throughout the year. And in terms of students, that's an area where we're looking to grow that population of students, undergrads, being able to train our undergrad population. But we have really found it helpful to partner even with any supervisor of a graduate assistant in our division and other divisions, and even just you know, leveraging the contacts that we already have in our other services that we provide. It's just tapping into them and acknowledging that we're willing to you know, be available as much as we can. So at this time, this is part of this slide. Actually, we provide as a handout to all training participants, and what it is a timeline of you know, where we've been as a university. So even prior to 2012 or to even this year, this showcases really how has Loyola been involved, or how has even higher education institutions played a role in what we consider this to be a civil rights issue. And so on this timeline, you'll see we take it far back as 1954 with Brown v. Board of Education. We look at even Plyer versus Doe, the Supreme Court case back in 1982, that really deemed it unconstitutional to prevent undocumented immigrants from access to a public education, right? K-12 education. And so we kind of move to the right of the timeline, and you'll see that things start to get a lot more interesting and active post 2001 when the DREAM Act at the federal level was introduced to Congress. We then move into 2010, and I think this is a critical year where some of our Jesuit schools, including Loyola Chicago, played a role. You know, there was a study commissioned by the Ford Foundation that called on Santa Clara University, Fairfield University, and Loyola Chicago. And if those schools are on the phone or the video, please chime in as well if I'm missing something. But I think it was in this year, 2010, where the call was made to really understand and investigate, you know, how many students do we estimate are out there, those who identify as undocumented or maybe from mixed status families. What is our priority? What are the priorities of our Jesuit institutions specifically in really ensuring, protecting, safeguarding, you know, their well-being, and also allowing for greater access to education for these communities. And so it was from 2010 that really started to pave the way for even this ally training, I think, to be developed, kind of knowing what recommendations were put forward. Some of the recs that came out of that report included just greater awareness and education of employees and faculty members and students of what were the issues, right? What are the issues? And from 2010, we'll see move into the right that at least specific to Illinois and in Chicago, we had in 2011 the establishment of the Illinois DREAM Act. So as folks might be aware, there is no federal DREAM Act, and it's really looking like it may never come to pass. But at least states, you know, we're I think Mata and I are and others here in Illinois are fortunate that we, you know, work and live in a state that tends to be a lot more progressive when it comes to opportunities for undocumented immigrants and families. And so with the introduction of the Illinois DREAM Act, there was a lot more inroads created to create scholarship opportunities, or at least make it affordable or at least feasible for undocumented students to be able to enroll, matriculate in higher education. Moving to 2012, we saw that under President Obama, there was the executive order to establish the DACA program, so Deferred Action for college, for early childhood, childhood arrivals. And we have some slides to explain what that is all about and what the process is. But yeah, so there's been a lot of activity there. If we move closer to 2014 and 15, so you'll see in 2013 is when we continue to offer the Share the Dream Ally Trainings to students, staff, and faculty. It really was important to note in 2014 when there was two things that happened. Loyola Stritch School of Medicine became the first school and still the only med school in the U.S. to welcome and admit, actively recruit DACA students into the program. And so also in 2014, we had a collaborative committee that was assembled by our former president of the university. And what this has evolved into now is a full-fledged committee known as the Dreamer Committee. And we work as an advisory group to issuing recommendations, assessing the context of Loyola, and also putting forth recommendations to our new president, Dr. Rooney at Loyola. And then you'll see that we have scholarships, so full tuition scholarships that have been created, set aside for undergraduate students. But this fall, we also had our law school introduce and establish 5 scholarships for incoming law students who were DACA recipients or DACA eligible recipients.
And so really what our training agenda incorporates is basically we start with what it means to be at a Jesuit institution, the opportunities that we have as being able to train other folks on these types of topics. We do include the conditions for success, so basically just saying what we're in the room for, that everything in the room, more of privacy stays in the room, but to share the knowledge that you have with others that you work with colleagues or other students in the classroom. And then going back with the Jesuit mission and values, really emphasizing what the Jesuit values mean and how we should keep going with the advocacy for undocumented folks, but also even just mentioning some words from the Pope of how even him as a Jesuit, how he strives for the importance of supporting this community. And then from there, we move on to the goals for the training, what we hope that the trainings will get from our training. After the goals, we do actually have people have an assessment afterwards to see kind of how they started off, not knowing too much, and then towards the end to see if we really met our goals for the training, and what things that we could work on just for future purposes. We focus a little bit more on the terminology and statistics because we do have a wide range of how of people's knowledge on the topic. We want to start from the beginning with terminology, like we'll see in the next couple of slides, just so that they get to get familiarized with the vocabulary, as we do mention it a lot. And statistics. I mean, a lot of people like statistics. They like to see numbers, but we also try to say that even though that we are providing these numbers, undocumented, any person is not just a number. They do have a story, but these statistics do provide kind of a scope, national and more at a local level, of how many undocumented folks there are at a national level at our school, and how we are able to target them, if we are able to target them, to help them more. Also, painting the portrait of an undocumented student. Of course, undocumented students don't have the same story, but they really do share similar experiences with intersectionality, different identities, and so we emphasize that folks that come from mixed status families, which is something that we want to gradually move into, focusing on them as well. Just painting this picture of how there's emotional and just unstable conditions for students when transitioning from high school and college and then higher education, just those obstacles that they grow through. And then legislation is also a big part of just going back how we had in the timeline, what these legislations have meant throughout time and how they're changing, and how they will change now. So that's something that we will work on, the legislation of what does that mean for DACA, what does that mean for advanced parole, and if there's anything else that we can mention about DAPA as well, the Deferred Action, the same DACA program for parents. And then we like to end with best practices of supportive educators. So that would include more of the interactive part of our trainings, which include case studies. They watch a video on how people come out as to strangers on how they feel about being undocumented. We also provide them with resources, local and national resources, just so that they can educate themselves on their own time when they have the chance on reading up on legislation and more tools and toolkits that we have a lot from United We Dream. And so our main source has been United We Dream, and we like to incorporate that and have them know like what their rights are, how they can implement what they've learned in their work areas, and if it's students, how they can do that in the future or even just in their classrooms. And we do end with a Q&A session just with any questions pertaining to certain legislations, what the university is going to do in the future, what certain departments can do to fully support undocumented folks, but also just questions more driven towards the undocumented student experience. And so that's kind of like the scope of our trainings of what they encompass. And then this is actually taken from our actual training. This is just one side of terminology. I think we have like 3 or 4, just because we do use these words a lot. We want to make sure that folks know the definition and they're comfortable with using them, and that they're comfortable with hearing them as well. So like in this case, we do incorporate undocumented student, who they are, how we define them, and an authorized person, and a non-citizen, just for you as an example. But we also like since 2012, because of DACA and everything that's been going on with the movements, we have implemented more vocabulary, much like documented folks, those who consider themselves even hyper-documented, those who just want to, just the barrier of being undocumented and wanting to have degrees just to be normal, right? And so the terminology is just a really big part, and we do emphasize that. We also include stuff like cultural citizenship. That's just how a person would integrate with the United States culture, and just not forgetting, but incorporating themselves as much as they can because they want to be as normal as possible. And so with these definitions, we don't just want to say the definitions, but we want to apply them in like the everyday type of experiences of how students might feel. And if we can move to the next slide. This is one word that has gotten a little bit of a spark, but it's really important to say, especially now with the political atmosphere that we've been facing, I guess, resurrection of the word illegal, and just reminding folks like, hey, what this word means, what it implements, and how we shouldn't use it, even though a lot of media outlets are using it now. And along with this word, actually this past semester for our last trainings, we've incorporated the video from this campaign, just so it's a 2-minute video, just so folks can actually see like, hey, this is where you see it in the media, this is what it really means to folks who are the audience who this word is used with. And so we have gotten feedback of why it actually is that. And so with different opinions, people start a conversation, and it's interesting even to just start these conversations even with just one word. But we do like to emphasize of not using this word, even not in the training, but just in your job community as well.
Can I offer something here?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we more recently, I would say after the election results came out in November, by that point we were already done with our pre-scheduled Share the Dream Ally trainings, and so we were approached, Maida and I, to provide even a 1.5 hour, so abbreviated trainings for faculty. And we were kind of torn about, well, does that constitute an ally training? And we decided to at least, for the greater good, to at least provide some education to our professors. And the reason being that oftentimes when my office connects one-on-one with students, or if we get word that students on our campuses are feeling facing bias or marginalized, most often when we find out and probe, like, where did this occur, we find out that it takes place in the classroom, right? And so we feel like, if we're looking at those critical campus partner populations, it's faculty. And so we thought it was important to at least shorten this training. But I will tell you, the slide when we showed the clip of dropping the I word, that campaign that was really started in 2009 or 2010.
Mm-hmm.
But again, might have mentioned, it's just been rearing its head again, in popularity. Once we stopped the video, there was some questions that came up from history professors in terms of why the word illegal in this context was seen as racist, because you'll hear in the video, we can send again the link after this, but in the video there's some commentary that says, hey, the word is racist. And but I think it was really healthy to see that there was this back and forth exchange even amongst professors, right, in sort of unpacking some of these issues and really, understanding what students are then faced with as well.
And that's really where we see even how this training is just taking its effect of how they're learning one thing and how they're automatically like reacting to it. And so it's interesting to see those reactions, because that's really how people indulge and show their emotion towards a certain topic. And so it was interesting to even see that at play, like in front of us, instead of just here's a 3-hour training and then go do your job. But now seeing it in front of us, it was, for me, it was a big deal. And so this is also actually another slide that we took from our training. This is part of like the statistics portion, and actually it has a lot of information, and we like to show it because of all of the information that it holds. And so here we talk about the undocumented students in the U.S. And here we have how 500,000 students are in high school, and out of those 500, 360,000 graduate. And so these are, again, focusing on undocumented folks. And then from there, seeing how the numbers keep decreasing, and even 50,000 enroll in college. And again, these statistics are about from 2005, 2006. But they have been kind of in the same range, where you see the higher the education level there is, the lower the opportunities that undocumented students have, that they don't reach a higher education. And even after college, few of them graduate or go on to a master's graduate school or medical school. And we like to emphasize that because it just shows the struggles that undocumented students do go through, and how there's a lack of opportunities, both financial and just moral support for this community. We like to show also this pie graph that shows kind of where undocumented folks are coming from. And we like to emphasize this because there's that idea that a lot of undocumented folks are correlated with being Hispanic or Latino, or even in this case being Mexican, and we don't we totally disagree with that because we don't want to implement that idea with everybody. We don't like to correlate that, and that's why we also show towards the left of who are these students. We emphasize that they are not all Latino, so don't really correlate the two terms together. And we even emphasize that 1 in 7 Koreans in the U.S. are estimated to be undocumented. And so from here, we tell how because of the different populations of where different immigrants come from, there's not always just a collaboration between that identity of being undocumented and just like how we put it on our third bullet point, Asian undocumented students may find it difficult to participate in groups that are heavily Latino because although the majority of undocumented folks are Latino, and that doesn't mean everybody is, and there is a hard time just correlating with the different identities that there are culturally and where these students are from originally. We also like to see how they're brought to the U.S. at a very young age. And so with that comes that how they do actually have different stories of how even they got here, if they got here without their families, of how they struggled through an education, if they received an education. And so even though we all do share that same experience of being undocumented, that same identity, we don't have the same experience. And then also some may not have realized that they've been in the violation of immigration laws. So they may not even have realized, like in my case, being undocumented, having that realization during high school when students were going on like study abroad trips during high school or applying to certain colleges. So all those restrictions that you see and then you question why. And that's really kind of like the center scope of when undocumented students really find out about their status. And it really is like a turmoil period because you're changing from high school and going into college. It's a whole different world. And then we actually, just like I mentioned before, like the mixed status families, it's not really much conversations about that. And so through like the semester, we've been trying to incorporate more, research more even on mixed status families, just because, okay, we are focusing on undocumented folks and how their struggles are at a higher education, but what do we have to say about those students who are U.S. citizens or U.S. residents and have family members who are undocumented? What are their types of reactions? What are their barriers? And so we actually just included this statistic of how 7.3% of K-12 grade students are children of unauthorized parents. And so how different their experience might be, how can we cater to their needs based on citizenship identities. You can take it, sure.
So yeah, we thought it's also important, to frame this training and conversations with our participants around the way that we operationalize here at Loyola the work of multicultural affairs, right? We take an intersectional approach to how we come to understand and recognize who our students are, and by many, I would say by extension, our staff and faculty as well. And so we always want to reiterate that there is not a single story, right, that defines an undocumented person, right? Their entry into the country or even their range of time living in the U.S. Is going to vary, right, depending on that individual person. So we always want to really just highlight the importance of the intersections of these identities, because I think, if we're looking at this from the perspective of admissions to then retention of these students, we have to keep in mind that they're undocumented. They may identify then as students of color. They also are likely to identify as a first-generation college student. So if you take into account all of the sort of factors that come into play if you're coming into a new environment like college with all of these backgrounds, it's important as educators then to keep this in mind and understanding what resources a student would need and how to best support them individually, right? And then the final point on the slide is hyperdocumentation. We have a professor here at Loyola, Doctora Aurora Chang, who had really drafted an article recently that talks about, and might have mentioned earlier, this idea of how incredibly hard it can be for someone who is seen as an outsider, as someone who doesn't belong in this country, right, legally. And so there's this enormous pressure on a student to prove their worth, right, to prove that they're quote unquote American or seen as American. And so if you take into account that approach of, or what that student might be, the burden that they're carrying when they come to Loyola of being, seeking, you know, academic excellence and recognition and degrees and pursuing advanced education, all of that can really be detrimental even to their, you know, emotional, intellectual well-being, right? So those are things that we always want to emphasize.
And we actually do like, sorry, to emphasize just with the part of intersection of identities, we do have a slide devoted to those who do identify as LGBTQ and undocumented. So just showing that importance of how the process of coming out, whether you choose to go one way or go the other way, how that process is even a burden. Just as an example of how do I come out to my friends and peers of that I'm undocumented, and how do I come out to my family as being LGBTQ? And so because there is a stronger movement, there has been a strong movement of this community, we like to incorporate that just to include that they do exist, that they do have these both identities. And so we like to show that with images. I forget who the artist is, Julio Salgado. He has great images of what it means to be LGBTQ and being undocumented. So it would be something great to look at if you would like to incorporate that as well.
All right, next we then cut into some slides about the barriers. So we really want to be clear with our audience about what are those tangible barriers to that Dreamers and undocumented students face. So we know that they're ineligible for filling out or completing the FAFSA. They don't have access to a social security number. So it's really, when we think about access to education, how affordable is college, right? What are their options if we keep this in mind? We also know that depending on what state you're located in, some students may not be eligible for specific degrees or to be able to actually utilize their degrees, right? And this pertains to, you know, careers in education, in law, medicine, et cetera. We then devote some slides to talk about study abroad, right? If our goal is really to encourage students to take advantage of the traditional, you know, university experience, and study abroad is one of them. It's important that we understand what are the policies that allow or you know, prohibit students the opportunity to go study abroad and come back and re-enter the U.S. Advanced parole is where we talk about that, but again, a lot of this is going to be moving forward. There's a lot of unknowns about advanced parole because we don't know yet, right, what is going to happen to DACA. And DACA is a prerequisite, DACA status is a prerequisite for a student who would like to study abroad via advanced parole. And sorry, not just study abroad, but the advanced parole does allow for students or even non-students to be able to leave the country for other situations, if there's to visit a family member who might be ill. So there's other exceptions to be able to leave. But again, that's where we talk about advanced parole. We talk about eligibility for work. You know, many of our students come to school looking to work part-time or obtain internships. So we talk about that in concert with the psychological, emotional impact and stressors.
And then we like to really talk about what Loyola has done, much like how we mentioned in the timeline, because you can probably just walk down the hallway here and people will say, well, like, yeah, Loyola's doing a lot, but what, like, when you ask them, like, what are they actually doing? A lot of people don't know, so we like to just educate them on how far we've gotten 3 years, especially after 2012, after DACA was implemented. And so here at Loyola, undergraduate or graduate students don't have to disclose their status on the application towards applying to Loyola. But this past semester, this past year, we have had some rough numbers. In the past, we've said that we couldn't have these numbers because of this kind of rule that we have that they don't have to disclose their status. But we have had some numbers in which we've estimated about 43 students in our College of Arts and Sciences are undocumented, as well as for our sister school, Rupe College of Loyola, a 2-year college and that has a much bigger population of documented students. They have 63 out of, I think, 120, I believe. And then at our Stern School of Medicine, that made history with being the first medical school of accepting undocumented students, of how they have 28 undocumented folks out there. And even just seeing these numbers, how even if we do consider them small populations, they're still here. And so we don't want to keep them in the shadows. We want to help them as much as we can. And so from there, we've gone into the Share the Dream trainings, which is what we're doing here, what we're talking about here, just implementing those as much as we can, providing information to a wide range of departments here on campus, and even moving on, providing more information and keeping up with those who have been trained already, and informing them of what's going on campus and even at a national level. We also have an Undocumented Proud group, and that group is a closed space. Right now it's a closed space for undocumented folks. And I, along with another intern here at SCMA, we have facilitated that this past semester, just because we've had a larger number of undocumented students. And so it's a closed space for us to be able to talk about our experience in college, even at home, and even with the election now, we were able to come together and everyone talk about what they're feeling, what their families are feeling, how they're not ready for this next semester. But it's a great opportunity for those who might not be able to implement a training right now, but to even just start this closed group. We have considered opening this group up for allies as well, but for now we wanted to just keep it closed so that we can have our own space to talk about a few things. We also have Arupe College of Loyola. Because of their bigger, much larger population of undocumented folks, they do have a student organization called DACA, Dreamers and Ally Student Organization, and they've been very mobile with advocating for certain bills here in Illinois, the Student Access Bill for public schools to have in-state tuition for undocumented folks. They've been very mobile with movements on both of our campuses, on Loyola campus and their campus. And so we do want to hopefully be able to collaborate with DASO and Arupe College to bring both of our organizations together and create a much bigger organization, especially now with the new political atmosphere. And of course, the Matcha Scholarship Fund. This is actually really big, and that's what Joe is actually wearing. This initiative initially started with the student government of Loyola and the Latin American Student Organization. They collaborated with creating the scholarship for undocumented folks. And so they would receive full tuition for the 4 years that they're here. And there's been fundraising efforts, through these shirts that we collaborate with Homeboy Industries in LA to create these shirts. And so half of the funds go to Homeboy Industries, who have whom their employees are previously incarcerated or are gang members, former gangbangers. And so for them to be able to come back into the workforce. And so half of the funds would go to them, and then half of the funds would go towards our scholarship. And so we actually had I forgot where he's from. I'm sorry, Flavio. But Don Graham, he actually donated $50,000. He matched our initial fundraising efforts of $50,000. So he matched that, and we got $100,000 for our initial cohort. And so that was big. And with that, we've been able to fundraise a lot more, sell these T-shirts, promote them during our trainings, promote them on our social media, just to have more funds and more Majid scholars to be able to take advantage of this scholarship. Our initial cohort were 5 first-year recipients, but this last cohort were 2 first-year and 2 transfer. And so we want to incorporate more transfer students just for them to be interested in Loyola, but also be able to continue their education here with a full ride scholarship.
Yeah, just to clarify, these scholarships are also renewable. So the goal is really to get these students to matriculate, enroll here, but also to stay here through and be funded through graduation.
And of course, a lot of questions spark up now of, okay, these scholars are documented, but what if DACA would be taken away? And so much what Joe and I were talking about is how we've talked with admissions and financial aid to have them keep their promise of helping these students, even though they are undocumented, regardless of what happens to DACA in the next couple of months. And this slide,
I think we might want to
okay.
speed through. Yeah, we can actually just, as I see our time, I want to make sure we allow enough time for questions. But we'll run through the next slides. Again, we're talking more on terminology. What is DACA? What is the cost? What's the process that you know, individuals have to undergo to apply for the status? The next slide, I believe, is more about how to renew, right? So it's important to understand for anyone who currently has DACA as a beneficiary, how do they go about renewing that, and what's the timeline like? Next slide, we see, so then we pause at this time in our training, there's another break. So we always build in 2 breaks at least, because 3 hours, we want to make sure folks are still with us and not snoozing. So after our second break, we come back, we look at a video, Myra mentioned this, we then we'll cut to case studies, and we'll have small breakout groups. They'll look at a case study that we've designed to look at financial aid, to look at different aspects of the college experience. And then we move into this idea of being an allyship. Every participant gets a folder filled with a lot of resources, and so we highlight what are those local, institutional, state resources that they should be considering if they find themselves, you know, meeting with the student or maybe unsure of how to effectively guide that student. We want to make sure they at least have this resource. We then have a form. Now, this is important at least for Loyola. We decided a few years ago that we didn't want to require any participant to, at the end of 3 hours, to deem themselves an ally. We said, look, think about it. If you don't feel comfortable to sign this form that says you're an ally and here's your sticker, please think about it, sleep on it, and then reach out to us as a department if you change your mind. So again, we want to give people enough time to really think about what it means to be an ally or to be, you know, accompanying a student on their journey here at Loyola. And then finally, evaluation. We want to make sure folks are letting us know, did they get what they wanted from this training? Are there things that we could do to improve it? That's very valuable information that we want. And then again, where do we go from here? We want to increase our student populations. We're trying to figure out scheduling. You know, do we offer more evening trainings or weekend trainings? Those are things that we're contending with. We're also seeking to collaborate more even this semester with our Chicago agencies, legal agencies even, to host Know Your Rights workshops, right? And so we'll be doing a lot more of that in the next few weeks. We want to continually stay current on legislation, updating our former participants on what's happening with DACA, things that they should know, and then assessment. I think at the end of the day, we really want to understand on an individual level, what's the impact of being trained, what has that meant for them in their job, but then also collectively, how have we really moved the needle in terms of making Loyola Chicago a more inclusive campus environment. All right, so with that, are there questions we can entertain?
I would imagine over time this has evolved a bit. Are there things that you've come to realize in doing this that you kind of discovered from, you know, situational things happening, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the structure, because again, so this started with our previous director of this department, and once she left the institution, it then became my responsibility to lead it and recruit for it. And so when I brought on board Mayra to help out in offering the student perspective as well, which is really critical here, we started to understand, or we started to pay attention into things like, how do we make this engaging or even more interactive? I think the piece around legislation, key terms, a lot of that can be very overwhelming. It's a lot of information overload. But we thought, how do we also engage the audience, you know, for those 3 hours? And so we did things like, I know Mayra did a gallery walk at one point where we were intentionally, we put media clippings, illustrations, things taken from mainstream media or other places, and we kind of plastered them around the classroom where we host these trainings. And we just invited participants as you walk in or during your breaks, take a look at the articles that you might see posted and learn, you know, to learn something about how complex the undocumented experience really is. And so that was something I think that was a little different last year.
Great. And Myra, did you want to add anything to that? Sorry.
I think going along, I think the case studies is where we've learned a lot more, because we do provide scenarios in which there's scenarios of how to orient students on living opportunity, on campus living opportunities, on working on campus and all of that. And so having people from different departments, they've been able to give us their insight of how their work helps us answer those questions. And so even though we have answered most of our questions, we always end up with more questions, like we said, but it's all just a learning process even for us, as the more trainings that we have, the more questions arise and the more research we do have to do. So there's always more work to be done.
Sure. And is there anything that you feel thinking into this semester and with, some of the potential changes, especially if President-elect Trump were to eliminate DACA in the coming months? Do you feel there are things that you're probably thinking about that already? Are there things you would change in any way about the training from where it is right now?
Definitely. Of course, the legislation part would be a lot more changed of how things used to be, how they are now, just letting people know how DACA is being removed and what that means for undocumented students. But I think the rest of the training, like the student experience and who undocumented folks are, I think that's more crucial at this point, of just keep educating folks on who our community is, what we are about, and just eliminating all those stereotypes that there are about our community.
Yeah, and I think also we're seeing more, so there are colleagues from the Dreamer Committee here, even faculty who are a lot more involved at the grassroots level in Chicago with agencies. We're actually looking to partner in the next few weeks actually to host Know Your Rights workshops. That's something that I think we had been asked about even last year, but we just didn't have the capacity to get things going. But those are the types of things that we're seeing. From our Dreamer Committee, I will say that we drafted an annual report that we issued to our new president. And one of those things was really to request some more resources to, someone who could assist us even on a part-time basis, I think, of looking at assessing these trainings that we're offering. Someone who could also just do a lot more of the day-to-day busy work that many of us who are, involved in our full-time jobs already don't have the capacity to make happen. So I think a lot of this, there's a greater urgency, obviously, around what are we doing to actively support our students. Sure.
And could you tell us, just, I think you touched on this a little bit, but anecdotally, what are some of the impacts? How can you, what are some ways you've seen the positive impacts of this on your campus? And maybe, Myra, I'd be interested to hear from your perspective as an undocumented student.
I think as a student, I think it's been a little bit more empowering, where students are learning a lot more about the topic of, and seeing even just these placards, just after giving these, after the ally agreements, just seeing these around campus. I mean, it really starts conversations of, like, what does that really mean? Like, I want to know more. But I really see how people really do want to become more interested, more knowledgeable about the topic, even just on social media, and seeing that take part in there. Even in the classroom too, I would say, of if I have professors that I know have been in the training, like I kind of like keep a close eye on them, like to see how like they would react in the classroom and how they would react to conversations between the students.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I would add too, like when we're facilitating, I think when Maya has the opportunity, like when she discloses her status and shares the story, or when we watch these videos that we do, there's a true emotional connection that's happening. It's often really difficult, I think, to find colleagues that are not, struck by what they're seeing or by what they're hearing. I think at sometimes it's a careful balance that we have to tread in terms of maintaining hope for a better, future for our students, our communities, but then also not feeling so defeated that because of legislation, there's not a whole lot that we can do. But yeah, I would say there's often, tears that are shed in the classroom, in the training itself. But then how do we take that and mobilize these advocates, right, to actually, be in the fight with us?